Illumin says in its mission statement that we are men transforming men. We are men. Our wisdom elders have told us just this week, and as they clarify this mission more and more, they say, we are men affirming men. We want to affirm men. We want to bless men. And so as I was thinking this morning, I was wondering, what am I going to say about Illumin? What am I going to say about this work? And I was looking out there over the Rio Grande and the Cottonwoods and the Sandia Mountains. And I said, I wonder what the mountains would want me to say. I wonder what the Cottonwoods would want me to say. What does that river want me to say? And I listened. And this is what I heard. Men, you don't have a lot of time. You don't have a lot of time. And that immediately reminded me of Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple. Before he died of cancer, he said, death is the greatest change agent in the world. It teaches us that we don't have time to live other people's lives. And that's not about getting in other people's business. It's about living my dad's life, or living Richard's life, or living somebody else's life, but except for my own life. I have another teacher, Bill Plotkin, who's a wilderness guide and a depth psychologist. I've done some work with him out of Animas Valley, and he says, self-doubt is as self-centered as self-inflation. Self-doubt is as self-centered as self-inflation. Our task is to dig as deeply as we can to find our authentic self and to offer that to the world as bravely and as beautifully as we can, to find our authentic self. So we are men transforming men. We are blessing men. And how are we doing that? By a power greater than our own, absolutely. But we're doing it by being authentic men. And we're doing it to bless other men so that they can become authentic, because the world needs authentic men. They need you to be authentic. And we're here to help. Absolutely. As one man said at his talk this last couple of days, he said, and he was talking about addiction, and we're all addicted, brothers. We're addicted, if nothing else, to our own thoughts and self-image. We work on our addiction so that we can honestly look at ourselves, at our failures, our sorrows, our grief, and our brokenness, and wake up to our humanity. And that brings me to something I'm very pleased to do, and that is to talk about Richard and to get him up here. I've known of Richard for 35 years. I was a novice with the Franciscan order on the West Coast, and our novitiate was in Los Angeles near USC, kind of a sketch, as my kids would say, a sketchy neighborhood. The same neighborhood, or not the same neighborhood they live in now, but a neighborhood like they live in now, they would say. And I have a friend here who used to be a Jesuit, and I just have to say this. I kept going back and forth, but I said, so we were living in this. We were doing our Franciscan thing in L.A., and we were renting from the Jesuits. And then the Jesuits would come down from Santa Barbara and kick us out for a month so they could have their poverty experience. Anyway. I still do that in my own life, so I shouldn't complain or laugh about it. I do it in my own way. So we would get together in this house that we were renting from the Jesuits, and we had a guy. This is 35 years ago. We had a guy. He was very excited. He said, "I have a cassette." Do you guys know what a cassette is? Okay, so he had and this little cassette player, and we'd get around in a little circle on a Tuesday night, and we're all down there, all these earnest young novices, and this scratchy but very sincere and earnest voice would be coming through, and it was Father Richard from Cincinnati, this young priest who had created a community called New Jerusalem Community, which I would say he's doing his men's work right there, because it was a group of men, young boys that were gathering around Richard to live the Christian life as they understood it. So that was 35 years ago, and I've known Richard in various ways since then. One of the things that impresses me about Richard is he's been here the last couple days. He's as comfortable here or being in a prison, talking with the men in the prison, or out on the street, talking with someone on the street, or talking with Melinda Gates or Oprah or Bono from U2. These are these circles, these conversations that he has are huge, and the people that are attracted to him come from all over. And that he's able to be authentic in all those different circles is something that I admire. And thank you for Richard. Just very quickly about, I'm just going to say two other things that I admire about Richard before I get him up here. And one is, over the 35 years that I've known him, Richard is probably the epitome of a man who has kept a beginner's mind. I'm constantly in awe of a man who has gone from everything from what we used to listen to about community building and the Christian life back in the early 80s, through the Enneagram, through the 12-step spirituality, peace, justice, and the integrity of creation, men as learners and elders, always from a biblical perspective and writing about biblical themes and biblical theology. He's written over 30 books. He's an author of over 30 books. Or I guess it's actually exactly 30. Richard, I know you probably lost count a long time ago. All the way up to last year, he was talking to us about spiral dynamics, something called spiral dynamics and all these colors. It just didn't take, but it was just not with me. I'm colorblind. I'm sorry. I can't tell the difference between green and turquoise, or So anyway, it was another example of Richard of how your mind is constantly just out there and pulling these things in and translating them for us. So that's the second to last thing. And then the last thing that I want to say, just because I've been close to it in many ways. For the however many years you've been working for, I'm sure even since New Jerusalem with those young men, this is a very special vocation that you've had, Richard. And I'm gonna frame it this way: for all those years, you have been a screen in which you have allowed us to just project our most golden projections and our most sinister projections, father figures, savior figures, you name it, betrayer, you name the stuff that we're carrying around in this bag of muck that we're working with, and we have thrown it up against you, and you have been there to take that and mirror it back to us, and stood there like a tree, like a redwood, like a rock, solid. And I don't know what the toll has been on you. And whether we ever really, can know you because of all that projection. But I appreciate it because it allowed us then to work hard on what we were doing and see ourselves, and then come to this point. So thank you very much, Richard. You've been a rock, although I do have to say, and I'm going to end with this. During our solemn ritual last year, you did fall into the fountain. Yeah, you did. It was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Well, it's just like old times. It's wonderful to be here with you. So, I feel so privileged, and I mean that sincerely, to have this much time. So if and I surely will, say some things poorly, I'll have time to improve on it, I hope, and say it better. But I thank you for your trust. I'm feeling very filled, as Terry mentioned, from the immense wisdom that was given us the last 2 days. We had 12 of our initiated men address us in ways that were just stellar, really stellar. If I had any doubt that we're forming a culture and that it does take a village to pass on a wisdom or a tradition, I think we began to form that culture where men of this quality can stand up with such inner authority, and it doesn't depend on ordination, on a high degree of theological education, but just men who've learned how to process their own heart and to make sense out of it. So I hope I can do that in some ways, but I'm living in great gratitude that so many of you have come to that place. Where do I start after that? What I'm basically going to do is during these 3 days we have together, parts of 3 days, is give you the history of how I got to where I got to, particularly in regard to men's work. Over on these 2 tables, I collected the books that were major influences on my thinking during that time. Some of them aren't the very books, most of them are, with some just representative of a certain poet or certain mythologist. These are, on this table, are the few things I've done, particularly in regard to men's work. And it all started in 1990, I think it was, with this little book. Wasn't it 1990? Yeah. The Wild Man's Journey. And then the men, that got out of date after a while, so they asked me to update it, and that became Wild Man to Wise Man, which is out in Spanish and English. But all of this is simply the gift of people teaching me, and it seems like God again and again allowed me to be in the right place at the right time, and I mean that sincerely. I said, how did that happen? Like this spiral dynamics thing, I meet these people, and then they pull me into their realm, and I said, wow, that contributes to the conversation. And I've been in the lucky position to share that with so many of you. So I thank you for your trust. We gave it the theme of drawing from a deep well. In our living school in the Center for Action and Contemplation, we call that the perennial tradition. It might not be a word that many of you are familiar with, but we're trying to popularize it, actually, because the only reason I can speak with any kind of self-confidence or inner authority that these are not just Richard's ideas, these are not just passing fads, is because I believe, and here's where the Franciscans did gift me, to really educate me in a broad liberal arts education, but in the perennial tradition. And for our purposes right now, what we mean by that is that if it's true, then it's got to be true all the time, everywhere. There can't just be such a thing as Methodist truth or American truth or Catholic truth. Or if it's true, it's true. And there's one Holy Spirit unfolding this creation, and people in other cultures and other eras are going to say the same thing. Of course they are. Why should that be so surprising? And you'd think those of us from the 3 monotheistic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, you'd think we would have been the first ones to recognize there's got to be one universe. Universe means to turn around one thing, and yet the monotheistic religions, because they got trapped in words, in my opinion, became the most argumentative of all. Just non-stop arguing, fighting one another, dividing. And we're going to see how we tried to make a path through that. So, let me just leave it at that. That's what I hope we're drawing on in all of this history. I'm going to try to walk you through why I could trust certain movements is I'd say, that's not new. That was already intuited by the Desert Fathers. Now, again, if I hadn't had this great education the Franciscans gave me, I wouldn't have maybe had the ability to recognize this isn't new. But what I found out is most of us, even we clergymen, tended to be educated inside of our own tribe, Presbyterian truth, Methodist truth, Lutheran truth, Catholic truth. And you began with your conclusions. Like if you were Catholic, there are 7 sacraments, which really was not agreed upon at all until the Council of Trent. But if you're a Catholic priest, you've got to pretend that we always believe this. We really didn't, and then you spend years proving it, with scarce biblical evidence. You Protestants know that. They really only have maybe baptism and Eucharist, but the rest are all sort of quasi-manufactured, maybe for good reason. I just give you that as an example of where you have your conclusions at the beginning, and then you garner all of your information to prove that that is true. And you and I are living in a wonderful time. I was with the execs of Google a couple of weeks ago, And we live in the age of Google, where we can't pull off those charades anymore. Do you understand? At least if the seminarians have any intelligence, they can Google it. And what's so fascinating to me is the staff and execs at Google are interested in non-dual thinking and contemplation much more than most clergy. Because to be educated as a clergyman is almost to get a PhD in dualistic thinking. Why our religion is the one that God loves and why the other religions are the religions that God hates. We don't have time for that. Thank you for saying that, Terry. We don't have time, because what's being destroyed is right beneath our feet. And if we don't raise up some enlightened people, I see no reason to believe that the destruction of this planet is not going to continue at a very quick pace. And this is, again, talk about one thing that we all turn around. The one thing that Christians and Muslims and Jews and Hindus and Buddhists and native religions all have in common is we're all drawing our daily sustenance from this same planet Earth. And if we keep fouling this nest on which we all walk, it's over. It's really over. And we can't make that a side issue as Pope Francis is now pushing the button of alarm. That this is a central, foundational issue. And wouldn't it be ironic, maybe not ironic at all, that we could move out of the world of words and Bibles and quotes and using them against one another and just learn to look at what we're walking on and learn to respect it. And if we'd learn that respect right there, maybe then we could move it to the horizontal level and respect those walking to our right and our left. But as you all know, we've come from 8 years of nonstop hatred in this country that's now reached a boil in this unbelievably sad and pathetic political discourse. This country that has access to so much religion, so much university, churches on every corner, schools on every corner, and we can produce this much stupidity, So let's just put it up right up front. We're in trouble. Well, we do not have wisdom figures. We have elderly men, but not elders. And we've been saying that in men's work for a long time. So thank you for wanting to be elders and to talk with the confidence that we just heard and the courage that we just heard Terry talk with. So the staff the only reason I have all these books out is because I have a wonderful staff, They took the daily meditations, those morning meditations online that I know some of you get from 2014 and collected them all together. I had to go through them again. And I started those with this metaphor of a well. So since we made that the theme of our weekend here, let me go back to this text. This is in the Spring Within Us book, which is the 2014 Meditations. There are certain words in the Bible that I call bookmark words, archetypal words that keep recurring like rock. And that for me, it becomes the eventual Christ image. But another one is well. And when it emerges, you do well to spend a little time with it. An ancient spiritual well is fully transferred to the individual person by the medieval mystics like Teresa of Avila, Francisco de Osuna, Juan de la Cruz. They're all using the well image, but they got it from the biblical image, and they got it even from Jesus, who in John 7, he says, "From the heart of the believer shall flow streams of living water." He's not talking about from God, from you. You're the well. The well is transferred from a geographic place to a personal place. N.T. Wright, who so many of you from the evangelical tradition, you appreciate his scholarship. And he says we've wasted 500 years arguing about justification by faith. And of course, the only people justified were humans, and not very many of those. We didn't care too much about the four-leggeds or the planet itself. And he says, and he makes a pretty strong case for it. He says, the great theme of themes in Paul is not justification by faith. He says that was just to distinguish Jews from Gentiles. And I hope we've gone beyond that, but we're always wanting to distinguish. He says the theme of themes in Paul is that the new temple is the human person. The new temple is the human person. I want to give you that in this first hour together. Because once you hear it, you can't see what you're not told to look for. So I'm telling you to look for that now. And you'll see it everywhere. You say, how did we miss it? No one told us to look for it. We Catholics and Lutherans fought for 500 years. Hopefully that ended last Monday, I hope. But it took us 500 years, and the Pope flew to Sweden and said, it's over, Those are arguments that we don't need to keep arguing about because they're dualistic arguments, where you take sides and you prove your side has got the total truth and the other side is going to hell. We don't have time for that way of thinking. So when you hear me use the word contemplation or the contemplative mind, and I'll probably use it a lot this weekend, I mean precisely when you move beyond dualistic thinking, where you stop framing everything in terms of Republican, Democrat, and think because you chose one of those sides, you're a smart man. Give me a break, all right? And this is most of America, all right? Gay, straight, black, white. Just give them a choice of two, and they choose one, and they think they're smart. It's sort of unbelievable that people can go to universities and not know any better than that. Well, the early Desert Fathers already discovered that in the first centuries, and they were the first ones who began to use this new word, contemplation, the contemplative mind, a different way of seeing the moment where you don't divide it into two and choose one. So whenever you see yourself doing that, making a clear, too easy distinction, and then choosing two. As you know, my last book's on the Trinity, the Divine Dance, and the law of three is dynamic. It flows. It keeps unfolding one into the other. The law of two is always oppositional, always antagonistic. You've always got to choose one side or the other. And what we're training you in contemplation is to stop doing that. And to recognize that you do it every 30 seconds. You do. Some of you are upset because I have a red shirt on, probably, because you don't like red. It creates this argumentative mind that's always, I don't like that. Constantly stating your preferences, as if the universe cares about your preferences, whether you like red or green, Who cares? Who cares? The ego. The ego defines itself by making distinctions. And not only do you choose one side, but I want you to notice this in yourself. Within a nanosecond after you make such a silly distinction, you normally position one higher and one lower. You do. Every one of you in this room does. I'm sorry to have to reveal that to you, And that's why we still have racism. That's why we still have sexism. That's why we still have homophobia. That's why we still have classism. That's why America still thinks God has shed his grace on us. I don't see Is there really a line between Canada and Mexico? We want to build a wall. Now that shows how far we are from the gospel, how absolutely far we are from anything approaching gospel. Where the Lord is the Lord of all the earth, all the peoples. But we want to divide into little tribes and decide that our tribe is better and we're the best. God has shed his grace on us. How convenient. Forgive me. I'll let go of it. So let's go back into Jewish history and find the early foundations for this image of spring or well, ojo in Spanish. They imply hidden depth, the work of digging, and the search for a foundational life-giving source, all of which are precisely our concerns this weekend. Well is one of those bookmark words that we find regularly appearing in the scriptures, developing a subtle but important theme. The first time we hear it is in Genesis 21, Abraham's well at Beersheba. See, the only way spiritual truth can be taught is through stories. When you make it conceptual, it's inherently non-contemplative and argumentative, whereas a story gives you room to move around inside of it and to fill in the gaps. Basically, why fundamentalism has emerged so much, not just in Christianity, but I'm sad to say in all of the world religions, is that most people have not taken a basic literature course. They don't know how language works, and how language communicates. And how you communicate deep truth is by story, by myth it was called. And even that very word, you're going to see some good books on it here. Even that very word we turned around, and I bet 99% of you in this room, if you would have been given or asked to give your definition of myth, you'd say, well, that's something that's not true. Talk about turning a meaning around 180 degrees. Historically, myth meant something that was always true, and could only be understood by being whittled down into small form. As G.K. Chesterton said, great truth can only be understood on small stages. And that's what these kind of stories are about. But literalists come along and want to fight where the real well was at, as if it matters. Do you understand? Literalism is the lowest level of meaning. Got it? Literalism is the lowest level of meaning. All right? Mythology is the highest. That says, like Augustine already did in the 4th century, every scripture, he says, has from 4 to 8 levels of meaning. We went backward, not forward, backward. Because the 4 to 8 levels leaves you all in the searching mode, where there's an open horizon, where you don't just ask questions and have them answered the way we did in our catechism classes. It's not asking questions, it's keeping the heart open so you keep seeking. See, and the Jews taught us this. They called it midrash. Well, it could mean this, and it could mean that, and it could mean that. How about if it means all three of them? What's wrong with that? But after the Enlightenment, 17th, 18th century in France and Germany and England, where a large percentage of us came from, we didn't like that way of thinking. We wanted one certain way, one answer to everything. And that's what got us in the trap we're in. Well, I keep losing my point here, don't I? All right, here we're back to Abraham's well. It was a symbol of an early peace treaty, it says this in the text, or an oath between the Israelites and the Ishmaelites, or the Arab peoples. There we have already the two, and the two seeking to overcome by meeting at this same well. And here we are 4,000 years later, and that breach still lasts between the Arab peoples, or many of the Arab peoples, and the Jews. Then there's a very interesting digging of 3 successive wells by Abraham's son Isaac. Go to Genesis 26. The first well is called, in translation from the ancient Hebrew, quarrel. Isn't that they name things so symbolically? The second name was called accusation. See, why would they name these two life sources with such negative words? No doubt that's where they were drawing their truth from. Deep wells of hatred, negativity, like most people who haven't been healed do. That's where your wounds lie, in the unconscious. They're usually not subject to conscious drawing up. They got to be healed to be seen very often. But the third well was called Rehoboth, or room or space. What a brilliant, the third well. Now this becomes Jacob's well, where Jesus will then meet the Samaritan woman centuries later. Room or space. There we have the contemplative mind. We're going to stay in these first two wells of quarrel and accusation until we find some room, some space to think, to forgive, to have compassion. And only the third well is claimed by Isaac. And here's what Isaac says. Now Yahweh has made room for us to thrive in this spacious place. But note that to find this third well, he had to go through the dualistic mind of quarrel and accusation before he could come to the open space of Rehoboth, where he could thrive. Talk about good symbolism. We can probably presume this was the well, as I said, that his son Jacob brought his sheep to, and that Jesus then comes to talk to the woman in John 4. Then there's one more important well in the Hebrew Scriptures. It's an almost Jungian symbol of the bitter well at Mara sometimes. This is found in Exodus 15. Here the Israelites desperately needed to survive in the desert. They've been searching for water. They finally get to this well at Mara, and dang it, it's a bitter well. And Moses tells them to throw a piece of wood in the well, and that will turn the waters sweet. This is almost alchemy, huh? Spiritual alchemy. How you got to deal with the bitter in your life. You got to put the sweet wood in and transform it. Not all sources become good wells, and some punitive and exclusionary messages in all sacred scriptures must indeed be sweetened. And here we got to be honest about our approach to Scripture. Brothers, there's where spiral dynamics helped. I'm sorry, I don't mean to offend the evangelicals in the room, but there is no way we can say that all Scriptures are equally inspired. A lot of them are garbage. I'm just going to say it as strong as I can say it, all right? They're punitive, they're exclusionary, they're hateful. And you go in, every line is equally inspired. You're in trouble. You're going to have a mental breakdown if you try to hold up to that. And I think it's produced a lot of crazy Christians, mentally unhealthy Christians. But what we're going to see as sacred mythology does, the problem is included in the solution. Hold on to that. The bitter well is included and has to be made into the sweet well. The passages in Scripture that regress, are hateful, violent, are all over the place. And here's where we Christians have a wonderful gift in Jesus. You know what? And I could take time the whole rest of the weekend to prove this. Jesus never quotes those passages. He's very selective. I don't think he's completely honest about the text. He never quotes Joshua and Judges once. They're at the purple level of violent consciousness, Kill all the Canaanites, women and children included. Yahweh said, I don't think Yahweh said that, all right? The Jewish people needed to do that at that point to survive, and we all have this strange policy of putting in God's mouth what we want to hear, right? What we want to hear. So let's grant the Jewish people that act of compassion to recognize they did that too. Now, fortunately, they moved beyond it. He only quotes the book of Leviticus once. I don't know if you've ever been inspired by the book of Leviticus. I would be very surprised. It's not an inspiring book. It's just laws and laws and laws. Maybe you lawyers would like it, but even the laws are sort of... And there's one little line hidden away in the middle. I think is it 18? Leviticus 18? Where after all, thou shalt not, thou shalt not, thou shalt not, thou shalt not, thou shalt not. Hidden away, and Jesus found it, is thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. One little positive line in the middle of a terribly negative book. And he finds the one positive line. Brilliant. Brilliant. You know? That's why he's the spiritual master to so many of us. Because he knows how to read sacred myth and sacred story and to find the sweet text, the soft spot, as Bono calls it, that moves us forward. So not all sources become good wells, and I hope what we can share with these days is those sweet spots where the great tradition connects, where great minds and great hearts read the same thing and see where the trajectory is heading. So that's what you got to look for. Even the politicians are saying this. Don't follow the polls, follow the trends. Have you heard that? The trends are what matter, you know. I'm saying the same thing theologically. And that's the one good thing. Well, there's a number of good things about being Catholic. But one of the good, and there's a lot of bad things too, but one of the good things is we have easier access to the big trend. Because we've just been around so long, you know, and we've made all kinds of terrible mistakes and done all kinds of wonderful things. And so if you're willing to see where the line is heading, where the trajectory is heading, you can see that just by honest and humble course in church history, and see that the saints and the mystics and the prophets keep returning to the same themes, like Bill talked to us about today, restorative justice. It's already clear in the Jewish prophets, and yet I would be willing to bet very few of you in this room were educated in restorative justice. What you were educated in was retributive justice, because those passages are there. There's plenty of them. And so we ended up with heaven and hell and purgatory, you know, which satisfied a certain level of consciousness, but did not satisfy the soul, did not satisfy an open heart, did not satisfy anyone who'd met the Holy One. So I see this as an early indicator of the need for spiritual alchemy, very real discernment. Let's say something good about the Jesuits too. They've taught us so much, and now we have a Jesuit Pope, and they've always capitalized, as you know, on this word discernment. And why do they do that? They had to distinguish discernment from law. Again, don't want to offend the lawyers, but Paul doesn't have much good to say about the law. I hope you know that, you know. But the way I was raised as a Catholic, you would have thought the law was going to save you, you know. I remember my first day in the seminary. He said, boys, you keep the law and the law will keep you. It's so ironic that this church, which worshiped the law so much, is now paying most of its money for lawsuits. The law came back to bite us. And we were the ones who always quoted the law, not grace, as the good Lutherans tried to teach us. But we just weren't ready for that because we understood retribution, not restoration. But the great ones did. So this is what the Jewish people, I said that, often called midrash. Let's try to do just this in our weekend now together to discern things. So let's just try this. Discernment means to see things more contemplatively, more subtly, where you don't rush toward judgment, where you don't rush toward conclusion, where you don't need an answer. Now, the male of the species is especially trained to want answers. We really do. And that's what led us to create these initiation rites. Because initiation rites, which were found necessary, it seems from everything I read for over a period of 5 years, a lot of them are right here on these tables, they were deemed necessary in every major culture in the world until the last few thousand years for survival. Because the young male was considered the loose cannon in culture. The young male left to himself, it was found, would again and again seek his own power, his own privilege, his own possessions, his own superiority, and it killed every village. And so the male had to be given a crash course, usually historically between the ages of 13 and 17, to grow him up, to get him to know there's a bigger world than you, right? And you are not the center of the world, and it's not all about you. I mean, we need it more than ever before. This is why we have the kind of leadership we have in the world today, where you have a hard time thinking of after Nelson Mandela, are there any? You have to look far and wide. Sometimes in little countries they emerge. But to play the game that you have to play to get to the top in big countries like ours, you usually have to prostitute your soul so many times that there's not much integrity left. And that's why I think we feel, do we really have a choice? You know, is there a great soul? Probably not. So we're always choosing the lesser of two evils, it seems. That's what happens when you don't have a wisdom culture, when the traditions of initiation, which is leading men to wisdom instead of just success. And success is not the shape of wisdom, although Americans don't know that. And wouldn't you think that people who would have worshiped a naked, bleeding man at the age of 30, when he had his whole life ahead of him, that's our worship symbol if you're a Christian, huh? Wouldn't you think we would have gotten the point that it wasn't about success and money and power? But we didn't. We didn't. We used Jesus for our own cultural purposes. He became an imperial god in Roman Christianity, and we needed an imperial god. So we made him into another emperor, Christ the King, not Christ the prophet. So that's where we are now. But there must be a very patient God out there, much more patient than I am. There must be a very loving God out there, much more loving than I am, that's for sure, who says, it seems, I can work with this. I can work with this. You're destroying the planet, I'm going to work with this. God's job description is to make life out of death. That's God's job description. And scientists have now discovered that with greater excitement, with greater conviction than most clergymen. Because they now are telling us in the biological sciences, the physical sciences, certainly quantum physics, that nothing in the universe dies. We say it in the funeral liturgy of the Catholic funeral, life is not ended, it merely changes. Life is not ended, it merely changes. But I don't know how many Christians really believe that. Scientists do now. Everything is constantly changing forms, constantly. And you got to let go of this form like Jesus did on the cross. He let go of Jesus. This is my meditation today, if you read it. I read my own meditations. You get it? And Jesus died and became the cosmic Christ. That's the Christ that's present in this room right now. Not inhibited by space or time or any one religion. Has nothing to do with the Christian, well, it has something to do with the Christian religion, but is not a possession of the Christian religion, not by any shot. In fact, some of the biggest opponents of the cosmic Christ are Christians. That'll become clear, I suppose. So thank you, brothers, for just letting me start this way with being real honest. I hope I wasn't offensive. I don't want to be that prophet's nothing. What I'm going to do after dinner is going to start with my own, you're going to have to endure some of my own autobiography. What led me as a young boy in Kansas, step by step, into the way I talk now. And you'll see that I began very conservative, very traditional. In some ways, there's no way I should have been born in Kansas and be sitting here talking like this. And in another way, there's a direct line. A direct line. And I hope that'll draw a direct line for a lot of you, too. Thank you for your trust. We'll move from here. God bless you. Thank you. Thank you.